After 3 years away, Mason Reed walked into the house he had bought for his mother and found her carrying dirty plates through the service hallway. She was not wearing her soft blue sweater. She was not resting in the sunroom he had built for her. She was wearing a gray Maid uniform, with cracked shoes and red hands shaking around a silver tray. His fiancée stood behind her, calm and polished, saying Mason's mother only liked helping around. But the look in Helen Reed's eyes said something else. It said she had been trained to stay quiet. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 years earlier, Mason had left Portland believing money could protect the woman who raised him. He had not been born into wealth. Before the medical software company, before the investors, before reporters started calling him a billionaire with a genius mind, Mason Reed had been the tired son of a tired woman in a small apartment near southeast Portland. Helen Reed had worked until her back ached and her hands swelled. She cleaned medical offices at night. She folded laundry for a downtown hotel in the mornings. She took every extra shift she could find, and when Mason got older and begged her to slow down, she only smiled and said rest was something she would learn later. Later never came for Helen. So when Mason's company finally exploded, when hospitals across the country started using the platform he had built, the first thing he did was buy her a house. Not just a house. A warm, quiet mansion tucked behind iron gates in the West Hills, with tall windows, a garden, a sunroom, and a kitchen bright enough to make morning coffee feel like a gift. He told her she would never scrub another floor unless she wanted to. He told her every bill was covered. He told her he had finally done what he promised. Helen cried the day he handed her the keys. Mason remembered that more clearly than anything. Then Singapore happened, a partnership overseas, 3 years of expansion. A schedule so crowded it swallowed birthdays, holidays, and ordinary Sundays. He called when he could. He sent money every month. He paid for house staff, groceries, healthcare, repairs, everything. And Celeste Monroe was there, his fiancée, beautiful, controlled, raised around old money and quiet judgment. Celeste always knew which fork belonged where, which names mattered at charity dinners, and which smile to use when people were watching. Mason believed she would help Helen feel at home in the new world he had built. Whenever he called, Celeste sounded gentle. Your mother is resting. Your mother is in the garden. Your mother is doing wonderfully. Sometimes Helen came on the line, but never for long. Her voice sounded smaller each time, thinner somehow, but Mason told himself distance did that. He told himself age did that. He told himself guilt was just what successful people felt when they could not be everywhere at once. That evening, he came home without warning. His private car rolled through the gates just after sunset. The mansion glowed gold behind the trees. 2 luxury cars sat in the circular driveway. The grass was trimmed. The fountain worked. Everything looked expensive and perfect. That was the first thing that bothered him. It looked too perfect. No music played inside. No smell of Helen's cinnamon tea drifted from the kitchen. No warm laugh came from the sunroom. The house felt still in a way that did not feel peaceful. Mason stepped through the front door with his suitcase in one hand. "Mom?" he called. His voice echoed through the marble foyer. No answer. A young housekeeper in a black dress uniform appeared near the hallway and froze when she saw him. "Mr. Reed," she said. Mason frowned. "Is my mother home?" The woman's eyes moved toward the back of the house, then dropped quickly. Before Mason could ask again, he heard dishes. A soft clink. Then another. He walked past the dining room, past a long table still scattered with wineglasses and dessert plates from some private gathering Celeste had clearly hosted that afternoon. Half-eaten food sat on porcelain. Linen napkins lay twisted beside crystal stems. The sound came from the service hallway. Mason turned the corner and stopped. Helen Reed stood near the laundry room door, holding a silver tray stacked with dirty plates. For 1 second his mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. His mother looked smaller. Her face was pale. Her shoulders curved inward as if she had learned to make herself take up less space. The grey uniform hung loose on her body. Her shoes were split at the edge. Her hands were red and rough around the tray handles. She looked at him. The tray trembled. "Mason," she whispered. The sound nearly broke him. He moved toward her slowly, as though any sudden step might make the moment worse. "Mom," he said, "what are you wearing?" Helen looked down at herself, then tried to smile. It was not a real smile. "Oh, this," she said softly. "I was just helping. Celeste had people over." Behind Mason, heels clicked against the floor. Celeste appeared at the mouth of the hallway in a cream silk dress, her phone still in one hand. For half a second her face changed. Not joy, fear, then it vanished. "Mason," she said, bright and smooth, "you're home early." He did not look at her. His eyes stayed on his mother's hands. "You're carrying their plates?" he asked. Helen swallowed. "It's nothing." Celeste gave a soft laugh. "She likes staying busy." Mason finally turned. "My mother," he said, his voice low, "is not house help." The hallway went silent. Celeste's smile tightened. "No one said she was. Don't be dramatic. She only helps when the staff is short." Helen lowered her eyes. That was what hurt most. Not the uniform. Not the tray. The way his mother looked down like someone waiting to be corrected. Mason gently took the tray from her hands and set it on a side table. Then he looked at her shoes again, cracked, old, worn down at the heel. A cold heaviness moved through his chest. "Mom," he asked quietly, "where have you been sleeping?" Helen's lips parted. No answer came. Celeste stepped closer. "Mason, you just got off a long flight. This isn't the time." But Mason was already looking past them. At the narrow door behind the laundry area, the door Helen had glanced at for less than a second, he walked to it. "Mason," Celeste said sharply. He opened the door. Inside was a storage room, no window, a metal shelf filled with detergent and folded towels, a thin cot pushed against the wall, and on a plastic crate beside it sat an old chipped mug. "World's best mom." Mason stood in the doorway and stared at the cot. For a moment, nobody spoke. The house behind him was quiet, too quiet for a place that had just held a party. The air smelled like expensive candles in the front rooms, but in this little storage space, it smelled like bleach, damp towels, and detergent. A thin gray blanket was folded at the end of the cot. Beside it sat a plastic crate with a few personal things stacked neatly, as if his mother had learned to own as little space as possible. Helen moved behind him, slow and nervous. "Mason," she said softly, "please don't make this worse." Those words cut deeper than anger would have. He turned to her. "Worse than this?" Helen did not answer. Her eyes went to Celeste, then to the floor. That small movement told Mason everything he did not want to know. His mother was not confused. She was not being dramatic. She was afraid of upsetting the person who had taken control of her own home. Celeste stepped closer, her perfume pushing into the cramped hallway. "This is being taken completely out of context," she said. Helen wanted a room downstairs. The stairs were bothering her knees. You know how proud she can be. She didn't want anyone making a fuss. Mason looked back into the room. There was no dresser, no real lamp, no window, no chair except a folded metal one leaning against the wall. On the shelf above the cot were cleaning supplies, boxes of trash bags, and a bottle of glass cleaner. Near the wall sat a small white bowl with a spoon inside it. Something dried around the edge. His chest tightened. "You put my mother next to bleach and laundry soap," he said. Celeste's face hardened for half a second. Then she softened it again, the way she always did when she wanted a room to believe her. "No. I made a temporary arrangement because your mother insisted on being close to the laundry area. She likes helping with the linens. It gives her structure." "Structure," Mason repeated. He walked into the storage room. It felt smaller once he was inside. He could barely turn without brushing the shelf. He reached toward the plastic crate and lifted the chipped mug. "World's best mom." The words were faded. The handle had been repaired once with glue. He remembered sending her nicer things after he became successful. Imported tea sets, crystal glasses, a coffee machine she had never used because she said it looked too complicated. But this cheap old mug was still here. Not in the kitchen, not in a cabinet, here beside a cot. Helen's eyes filled when she saw him holding it. "I kept that one," she whispered. Mason looked at her hands, red at the knuckles, dry around the fingers. Not the hands of a woman who spent her days resting in a sunroom. Not the hands of a woman being cared for. He set the mug down carefully. "Where are your clothes?" Helen pressed her lips together. Celeste answered for her. "Most of her things are in storage. We were reorganizing." Mason did not look at Celeste. "Mom," Helen swallowed. She pointed toward a narrow plastic bin beneath the cot. Mason crouched and pulled it out. Inside were a few folded sweaters, plain underclothes, an old Bible, reading glasses wrapped in a tissue, and a small pill organizer. That was all. His mother had lived in a mansion with 8 bedrooms, and everything she used fit inside one plastic bin. Something hot rose behind Mason's eyes. He stood. "Pack this," he said. Helen looked startled. "What? We're leaving." Celeste let out a short laugh. "Mason, don't be ridiculous." He turned to her then, slowly. The laugh died in her throat. "I'm taking my mother out of this house tonight. You cannot just walk in after 3 years and make decisions based on one emotional moment," Celeste said. Her voice was sharper now, less polished. "You have no idea what it has been like managing this house, managing staff, managing her moods, her forgetfulness, her little episodes." Helen flinched. Mason saw it. There it was again. Not the words, the reaction. His mother had heard this before. Maybe many times, maybe quietly, maybe in front of staff. Maybe in rooms where no one defended her because everyone was paid to keep the house running and their heads down. "Moods?" Mason asked. Celeste took a breath, realizing she had pushed too far. "I'm saying she has been fragile. I didn't want to worry you while you were overseas." Helen spoke quickly. "She didn't want to bother you, baby. You had so much work." Mason looked at his mother. Her voice was gentle, but it sounded rehearsed. Not fake, worse, practiced. Like she had said it so many times that she had started to believe the shape of it. He stepped closer to her. "Why didn't you call me?" Helen's eyes moved away. "I did not want to interrupt. Mom, you were building something important. You are important." Her mouth trembled. For 1 second, the old Helen came through. The woman who used to look him straight in the face when he was wrong. The woman who never needed fancy words to make him understand himself. But then the fear returned. Her gaze dropped again. Behind Mason, the young housekeeper still stood near the hallway. She had not moved. Mason looked at her for the first time with real attention. She was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes and hands folded tightly in front of her apron. "What's your name?" he asked. She glanced at Celeste. Celeste answered first. "That's Tessa. She helps with service," I asked her. The young woman swallowed. "Tessa, sir." Mason held her gaze. "Has my mother been sleeping in here?" Tessa's face went pale. Celeste snapped. "Tessa, you don't need to answer that." Mason turned slightly. "Yes, she does." The hallway filled with a silence so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Tessa looked at Helen. Helen looked back at her with something quiet and pleading, not asking her to lie, but asking her not to suffer because of the truth. Tessa lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That was all she said. But it was enough. Mason felt the floor change beneath him. Not literally. The marble stayed where it was. The house stayed perfect. The light still glowed warm above them. But something in his life shifted in a way that would never shift back. He took out his phone and called his driver. "Bring the car to the side entrance," he said. "Now." Celeste stared at him. "You're really going to embarrass me like this?" Mason looked at her, stunned by the word she had chosen. Embarrass. His mother had been sleeping beside detergent bottles, eating alone, carrying dirty plates in a uniform, and Celeste was worried about embarrassment. He turned back to Helen. "Come with me." Helen shook her head faintly. "Mason, I don't want trouble." "You're not trouble." The words landed softly, but Helen closed her eyes as if they hurt. Mason reached for the plastic bin, then stopped. He did not want his mother walking out of that room with her life in a laundry bin. He took only the Bible, the glasses, the medicine, and the chipped mug. He placed them gently into a clean tote bag from a nearby shelf. Celeste folded her arms. "Where exactly do you think you're taking her? A hotel? She has everything she needs here." Mason looked at the cot, then he looked at Celeste. "No," he said, "she has what you allowed her to have." Helen's knees seemed to weaken. Mason put one arm around her shoulders. She felt too light under his hand, too careful, like someone who had been trained not to lean too much on anyone. As they walked toward the side entrance, Tessa stepped back to let them pass. Her eyes met Mason's for one brief second. There was fear there, but also something else. Relief. Celeste followed them all the way to the door. She did not shout, she was too controlled for that, but her voice had gone cold. "You are making a mistake," she said. "You came home tired and emotional, and you're letting guilt make decisions for you." Mason opened the side door. Cool night air rushed in. For the first time since he arrived, Helen breathed deeply. Mason felt that breath through her shoulder. He helped her into the car. She sat in the back seat with the tote bag on her lap, holding the chipped mug through the fabric as if it might disappear. Mason slid in beside her and told the driver to go to the quietest hotel they knew. Only when the gates closed behind them did Helen speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Mason turned to her, broken by the words. "For what?" She looked down at her hands. "For letting you see me like that." He wanted to tell her it was not her shame. He wanted to say 100 things, but his throat tightened so badly that for a moment no words came. Back at the mansion, through the rear window, Mason saw Celeste standing beneath the porch light, still and pale in her cream dress. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. It was short. "Mr. Reed, if you want to know why your mother never reached you, look at the phone Celeste kept in the kitchen drawer. And please don't tell her I texted you." Mason did not answer the message right away. He sat in the back of the car beside his mother, staring at the words on his screen while the city lights slid across the window. Helen was quiet next to him, too quiet. She held the tote bag in both hands, her fingers resting over the place where the old mug sat inside. Every few seconds she looked down as if checking that it was still there. Mason turned the phone face down on his knee. Not yet. He wanted to demand answers from her right there. He wanted to ask about the kitchen drawer, the phone, the blocked calls, the way her voice had always disappeared from his life after a few careful minutes. But Helen looked exhausted, not just tired from one bad night, tired in the old deep way people get when they have spent too long trying not to need anything. So he said nothing until they reached the hotel. It was not the grandest hotel in Portland, and that was why Mason chose it. He did not want marble columns, whispered attention, or staff rushing toward him because they recognized his name. He wanted quiet, warm light, a clean room, a door his mother could close without asking anyone's permission. The manager recognized him anyway, but Mason kept his voice low. "My mother needs a suite," he said. "Private floor if possible. No visitors unless I approve them." Helen touched his arm. "Mason, I don't need all that." He looked at her. "Tonight you don't have to need anything. I'll handle it." She lowered her eyes again, but this time it was different, not fear. Something closer to not knowing how to receive care anymore. Upstairs, the suite was soft and quiet. There was a sitting room, a bedroom with thick curtains, a small dining table, and a bathroom with warm lights around the mirror. Helen stood just inside the doorway and looked around like she had accidentally stepped into someone else's life. Mason watched her take in the bed, the clean sheets, the robe folded at the foot, the bowl of fruit on the table. A woman who had lived in his mansion should not have looked overwhelmed by a hotel room. But she did. That was what broke him most. He set the tote bag on the table and took out her medicine, her glasses, the Bible, and the mug. He placed the mug by the kettle. Helen saw it and pressed her lips together. "You kept it all these years," he said. She nodded. "It was the first thing you ever bought me with your own paycheck." Mason froze. He had forgotten that, not because it had meant nothing, because life had become crowded with bigger things, bigger gifts, bigger numbers, bigger rooms. And somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that his mother had never needed bigger. She had needed him to remember. A room service attendant brought tea and a light meal. Helen tried to say she was not hungry. Mason did not argue. He only sat across from her and uncovered the soup, the bread, the roasted chicken, the warm vegetables. He put a napkin beside her plate. Not a paper towel, not a folded napkin left over from someone else's table, a real one. Helen stared at the food too long before picking up her spoon. Mason noticed that too. People who were used to eating comfortably did not hesitate before a warm meal. They just ate. His mother lifted the spoon slowly, like she was waiting for someone to tell her she had taken too much. After a few bites, she set it down. "I should have told you," she whispered. Mason leaned forward. "Then tell me now." Helen looked toward the window. The city glowed below them. For years, Mason had lived above cities like this, in hotel rooms and boardrooms, telling himself he was building something for her. He had never imagined she was shrinking inside the house he had built. At first she said it wasn't like tonight. Mason stayed quiet. She said the upstairs bedroom needed repainting. Then she said the guest wing had to be staged for donors and business guests. Then she said it would be easier for me downstairs, just for a few nights. Helen folded her hands in her lap. A few nights became weeks, and the uniform, Helen's face tightened. There was a dinner. One of Celeste's guests thought I was staff because I was clearing plates. Celeste laughed and said it was easier that way. After that, she bought the uniform. She said it would avoid confusion. Mason closed his eyes. A deep, ugly pain moved through him. He had seen enough business cruelty to recognize control when it was dressed up as convenience. That was what made it so believable. No one said, "I am taking your dignity today." They said, "This is easier, this is temporary. Don't make it awkward." "Why didn't you call me?" he asked again, softer this time. Helen's eyes filled, but she did not cry-eyed. The words landed slowly. Mason looked up. "You tried?" She nodded. "At first I called your number, sometimes it rang. Sometimes it didn't. Then Celeste told me international calls were interrupting your work. She said your assistant had asked her to manage family contact because of your schedule. My assistant never said that." Helen looked ashamed, as if she had somehow failed by believing it. "She said you were under pressure. She said investors were watching everything. She said if I loved you, I would not make you worry about things at home." Mason stood and walked to the window. He needed space because the anger was coming too fast. He could handle betrayal when it came at him. He could handle enemies. He could handle lawsuits, competitors, reporters, boardrooms full of men trying to corner him with numbers. But this was his mother. This was an old woman being taught that love meant silence. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. There are letters, too. She kept them in the locked mailbox in the service pantry. Mrs. Reed wrote them after every time she tried to call you. Mason read it twice. Then he turned back to Helen. "Did you write to me?" Helen's face changed. It was small, but he saw it. The fear, the surprise, the tiny collapse of someone who had hidden pain for so long that even being asked about it felt dangerous. "I wrote sometimes," she said. "How many?" She looked down. "I don't know, Mom." Her voice became very quiet. "A lot." Mason sat back down across from her. "What happened to them?" "I gave them to Celeste." His hands curled slowly on the table. Helen rushed to explain, as if Celeste still needed defending. She said she had a private courier. She said mail from the house was safer that way. "I didn't want to bother anyone. I thought maybe you were reading them and just didn't have time to answer." The last words broke loose from her voice. Just didn't have time. Mason felt sick, because that was exactly the kind of thing he had taught her to believe, not with cruelty, not on purpose, but with missed calls. Short conversations, promises to visit after the next launch, the next meeting, the next quarter. He had made absence look normal. Celeste had only used what he had already made believable. He reached across the table and took Helen's hand. "I never got them." Her eyes lifted. For the first time that night, she looked directly at him. "You didn't?" "No." She stared at him like the answer hurt and healed at the same time. Mason's phone buzzed a third time. This message contained no warning, no explanation, just a photo. It showed a small locked metal box tucked inside a lower cabinet. On top of it sat a stack of envelopes tied with a blue rubber band. Every envelope had his name on it, Mason Reed, written in his mother's careful handwriting. A second photo came in right after it, a phone screen, an old phone. The contact list was open, his name was there, blocked. Mason stayed awake long after his mother finally fell asleep. Helen slept in the bedroom with the door half open, as if even here, in a hotel suite with clean sheets and a lock on the door, she was not fully sure she was allowed to rest. The lamp beside her bed was on low. Her medicine sat on the nightstand. The old mug stood beside a cup of tea she had barely touched. Mason sat in the living room with his laptop open and his phone beside it. The photos from the unknown number remained on the screen. The locked metal box, the envelopes, the blocked contact. He had spent years building software that helped hospitals trace errors through complicated systems, missing files, delayed reports, broken communications. He knew how truth hid in patterns, not in one big event, in small repeated choices, a deleted message here, a changed setting there, a person made unreachable, then blamed for not speaking. By midnight, he had already called his chief of staff and asked for a secure backup of every email thread involving his mother's name, Celeste's name, and his personal account. He called his private counsel next, not to sue anyone yet, not to make threats, just to preserve records before anyone had time to clean up the mess. His lawyer, Mara Whitfield, answered on the third ring. She had handled company acquisitions, hostile board fights, and family trust matters for him before. She was calm in a way Mason trusted. Mason, she said, voice rough with sleep but alert. Tell me what happened. He did. Not everything, not yet, just enough. There was a long pause when he finished. Do not confront Celeste again tonight, Mara said. Do not accuse her in writing. Do not send angry texts. Preserve everything. Screenshots, call logs, photos, witness names. If your mother was isolated, financially exploited, or falsely represented as impaired, we need a clean record. Mason looked toward the bedroom. She slept in a storage room, Mara. I heard you. She was wearing a uniform. I heard you, Mara said again, softer this time, and I believe you. But belief is not the same as proof. Let's build this right. That sentence held him back from doing what every nerve in his body wanted. He wanted to drive to the mansion, open every drawer, tear through every cabinet, and demand the truth from Celeste until her perfect voice cracked. But Mara was right. If he moved too fast, Celeste would say he was emotional. She would say Helen was confused. She would turn cruelty into misunderstanding, so Mason waited. At 6 a.m, the unknown number texted again. I can meet you, not at the house. There is a diner off Barber Boulevard. Booths in the back, 9 o'clock. Please come alone. Mason stared at it for a long time. Then he replied, I'll be there. He left Helen with a private nurse from a reputable home health agency, a woman in her 50s named Angela who spoke gently and showed Helen her badge before stepping inside. Mason made sure Helen understood this was not someone hired to watch her. It was someone there in case she needed breakfast, medication, or help while he was gone. Helen nodded, but the shame in her face returned. I'm not helpless, she said. I know, Mason answered. That's why I'm asking, not ordering. Something in her expression loosened. Not much, but enough. The diner was the kind of place Mason had not entered in years. Vinyl booths, coffee that smelled burnt in a familiar way. Truckers, office workers, and older couples sat over eggs and toast, all of them living ordinary mornings while his life quietly split open. Tessa was already in the back booth. She had changed out of her uniform. Without it, she looked younger and more tired. Her hair was pulled back, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she had not drunk from. When Mason sat across from her, she looked toward the door first, then at him. Thank you for coming, she said. You sent the messages. She nodded. Why? Tessa breathed in slowly. Because last night was the first time I saw someone in that house who could actually stop it. The words were simple. That made them worse. Mason leaned back, letting them land.
How long has my mother been in that room?
Tessa looked down at her cup. I started working there 14 months ago. She was already there. Mason felt his jaw tighten. Already, yes. And no one told me. Tessa's eyes lifted. People wanted to keep their jobs. It was not an excuse. She did not say it like one. She said it like a fact that embarrassed her. Mason nodded slowly. Tell me everything you know. Tessa looked around the diner again before opening the canvas bag beside her. She pulled out a small folder and slid it across the table. Inside were printed schedules, photos, a copy of a house staff task list with dates at the top. Mason saw his mother's name written in small letters beside chores no elderly parent should have been assigned in her own home. Laundry folding, guest tray cleanup, silver polishing, service hallway reset, downstairs linen inventory. He stared at the page until the words blurred. Tessa, he said quietly, why is my mother on a staff task list? She wasn't supposed to be, Tessa said. Not officially. Mrs. Monroe used pencil first. Then she stopped caring who saw it. Mason looked through the photos next, the storage room from different angles, the cot in the same place, a bowl on the crate, a sweater folded under cleaning rags because there was no proper drawer. One picture showed Helen in the gray uniform, standing near a pantry shelf with her hands clasped in front of her. Mason could barely look at that one. She made her wear it when guests came, Tessa said. Not always, mostly during dinners, charity evenings, investor gatherings. She said it kept things less confusing. Mason's voice dropped. Confusing for who? For people she wanted to impress. Silence sat between them. A waitress came by and warmed Tessa's coffee. Tessa thanked her, waited until she left, then reached into the folder again. There's more. She pulled out a small flash drive and placed it beside Mason's hand. I recorded some things. Not everything. I was scared. Oregon has rules about recording conversations, and I don't know what can be used legally. But I needed something. I needed someone to believe me if this ever came out. Mason did not touch it yet. What's on it? Audio from the pantry, some from the service hall. mostly Celeste talking when she thought only staff could hear her. His stomach turned. About my mother? Tessa nodded. Mason closed his eyes for a second. He did not know how many times a heart could break for the same woman in one day. When he opened them, Tessa's face had changed. She looked afraid again. There's something else you need to know, she said. Mason looked at her. The room wasn't an accident. It wasn't because of stairs, Mrs. Monroe hired a contractor to create paperwork saying the upstairs suite had water damage and needed long-term repairs. But there were no repairs, no crew came, no real work was done. Mason went still. How do you know? Because I was the one who had to let the contractor in. He was there less than 20 minutes. He took pictures of the hallway, drank coffee with Celeste in the kitchen, and left. A week later, she started telling people your mother couldn't use her room because of renovation issues. Mason felt something cold settle in him. This was not neglect. This was a system, a plan built out of fake paperwork, social control, and the quiet obedience of people who needed paychecks. Do you have the contractor's name? He asked. Tessa nodded and pointed to the back page of the folder. Invoice copy. I took a photo before she shredded the original. Mason looked at the page. There it was. A company name, a date, a repair estimate, a signature, and at the bottom under billing notes, one line made his hands go still. Paid from Helen Reed care account. Mason read the line again. Paid from Helen Reed care account. For a few seconds, the diner around him seemed to fade. The clatter of plates, the low hum of morning conversations, the hiss of the coffee machine, all of it moved far away. He saw only those words on the invoice and felt something inside him turn cold. He had created that account for his mother, not for parties, not for fake repairs, not for Celeste convenience. He had opened it before leaving for Singapore, after a financial advisor told him it would be cleaner to separate Helen's living expenses from the household operating budget. Healthcare, groceries, clothing, transportation, personal comfort. That was what it was for. Mason had funded it every month without even thinking about it. He had thought money was moving toward his mother. Now he wondered how much of it had ever reached her. Tessa watched his face carefully. I didn't know what that account was, she said. Not at first. I just saw the name. Helen Reed care account. I thought maybe it was normal. Mason folded the invoice and placed it back in the folder. His hands were steady now, too steady. That was always how anger worked in him when it became serious. It stopped shaking, it became quiet. Who had access, he asked. I don't know, Tessa said, but Mrs. Monroe handled most payments through the house office. She had a laptop in the study. Sometimes she would ask the bookkeeper to process things, but sometimes she did it herself. Bookkeeper, part-time, a woman named Dana Lowell. She came in twice a month. I heard her question a charge once. Celeste told her it was approved by you. Mason nodded slowly. Another name. Another person who might know something. Another place where the truth had brushed the surface and been pushed down. He took the flash drive, the folder, and the invoice copy. Then he looked at Tessa. You did the right thing. Tessa gave a small, bitter smile. I waited too long. You were scared. That doesn't change what Mrs. Reed went through. No, Mason said. It doesn't. But it matters that you're here now. The words seemed to hit her harder than he expected. She looked down at her coffee, blinking fast. People who lived around cruelty often learned to measure themselves by the worst thing they had failed to stop. Mason understood that feeling now. It was sitting inside him too. By late morning, Mason was in a private conference room at the bank where Helen's care account had been opened. Mara Whitfield sat beside him, her tablet open, her expression calm but sharp. Across the table, the bank manager, Edwin Park, looked uncomfortable in the way. Professionals looked uncomfortable when a wealthy client asked questions that could turn into legal trouble. Mason had not raised his voice once. That made Edwin more nervous. I need full statements for the last 3 years, Mason said. All outgoing transfers, card authorizations, authorized users, login history if available, and copies of any access documents. Edwin cleared his throat. Mr. Reed, we can provide statements, of course, but some account details may require formal written authorization depending on structure. Mara slid a document across the table. We anticipated that. Mr. Reed is the primary funder and trustee on the care account. Helen Reed is the beneficiary. Celeste Monroe was granted limited administrative access for household payment purposes. She was not given discretionary spending authority. Edwin read the document. His face changed slightly. Mason noticed. "What?" Mason asked. Edwin looked up. There was an amendment. Mara's eyes narrowed. "What kind of amendment?" The bank manager turned to his computer and typed for a while. Too long. Each second stretched across the room like wire. Finally, he said, "A third-party authorization was expanded approximately 26 months ago. It appears Ms. Monroe submitted a signed instruction allowing broader payment discretion for elder support-related expenses." Mason went still. "Signed by whom?" Edwin hesitated. "By Helen Reed." Mason stared at him. "My mother didn't understand what she was signing." "I can't speak to that," Edwin said quickly. "I'm only telling you what is in the file." Mara leaned forward. "We'll need a copy of that signed instruction. We'll also need the notary record and the method of submission." Edwin nodded, now pale enough that Mason knew the bank understood the risk. A few minutes later, the documents appeared on the screen. Helen's signature was there, shaky, uneven. Not fake at first glance, but nothing like the strong signature Mason remembered from old birthday cards and tax forms. Beside it was Celeste's name as requesting administrator. The notary was a mobile notary from a company Mason had never heard of. Mason's throat tightened. "She made my mother sign this." Mara's voice stayed controlled. "We don't know that yet, but we know enough to ask." Then the statements came. At first the charges looked ordinary: the pharmacy, groceries, household supplies, mobility consultation, dental work, transportation. Then the pattern shifted: home improvement, interior services, wardrobe expense, wellness retreat, hospitality supplies, private event catering, luxury boutique charges under vendor names that tried to sound like lifestyle services. Mason recognized one of them because Celeste had once shown him a handbag from that store over video call and joked that he owed her something beautiful for being so patient with his overseas schedule. He had laughed then. He remembered laughing. Now the amount sat in front of him, paid from his mother's care account. Mara scrolled through the statement. There are repeated transfers labeled home comfort upgrades. Several are followed within 24 hours by payments to high-end retailers, restaurants, and travel booking platforms. Edwin looked like he wanted to disappear. Mason said nothing. His eyes moved down the rows of charges: spa membership, personal styling consultation, imported linens, private car service, 3 nights at a resort outside Napa. His mother had been sleeping on a cot in a storage room while money meant for her comfort paid for Celeste to live like a woman who had won a life she never earned. At the bottom of one monthly statement, Mason saw a small charge that made his chest hurt more than all the large ones: discount, pharmacy, blood pressure medication, $32. It was the smallest number on the page. It was the only one that looked like it actually belonged to Helen. Mara closed the laptop halfway. "Mason." He kept staring at the statement. "She had access to everything," he said. "Not everything, but enough. I gave her enough to hurt my mother." Mara did not soften the truth. "You gave her access because you trusted her. She may have abused that trust. That distinction matters legally. Emotionally, I know it does not feel like it does." Mason leaned back and pressed his fingers against his eyes. He had spent years thinking of care as something that could be arranged: a fund, a house, a staff, a fiancée nearby. Systems. He trusted systems because systems had made him rich. But families were not systems. People were not invoices. Love could not be outsourced and then checked once a quarter. His phone rang. "Helen," he answered immediately. "Mom?" Her voice came soft through the phone. "I didn't want to bother you." "You're not bothering me, I know. Angela told me to call if I wanted." She said asking is not bothering. Mason closed his eyes. A stranger had managed to say in one morning what his mother had needed to hear for 3 years. "I'm glad you called," he said. There was a pause. Then Helen asked, "Are you angry?" Mason looked at the bank statements on the table. "Yes." "At me?" The question came so quietly it almost did not sound like a question. "No," he said, and his voice broke a little. "Never at you." On the other end, Helen breathed out, a small unsteady breath. He could almost see her sitting on the edge of that hotel bed, holding the phone with both hands, waiting to be blamed for the way she had been hurt. "I signed papers," she whispered. "Celeste said they were for the house, for bills. She said it would make things easier for everyone." Mason opened his eyes. Mara looked up. "What papers, Mom?" "I don't remember all of them. There were several. After I moved downstairs, she said I was making things complicated by asking questions." Mason's hand tightened around the phone. Helen continued, more slowly now. I didn't understand some of the words. She said if I trusted you, I should trust her. Mason looked at Mara. Mara was already writing. Mom, Mason said carefully, did Celeste ever take you to a notary? Helen was silent for a long moment. Then she said, a woman came to the house. Celeste said she was just there to witness signatures. I asked if I should call you first. Mason felt the room go still around him. What did Celeste say? Helen's voice dropped to almost nothing. She said you were in a board meeting. She said you had already approved it. Mason stood up so suddenly his chair scraped against the floor. Edwin flinched. Mara did not. She only looked at him with the serious, grave expression of someone who knew the matter had just crossed a line. After the call ended, Mason walked to the window of the conference room and looked down at the city. Portland moved below him like any normal day. Cars turning, people crossing streets, coffee shops filling, life going on, indifferent to one family's private collapse. Behind him, Mara spoke quietly. This is no longer just mistreatment in the home. We may be looking at financial exploitation. Mason turned. Then we build the case. Mara nodded carefully. His phone buzzed again. This time the message was from his chief of staff. We pulled archived drafts from your mother's old email profile. There is one unsent message addressed to you. It mentions Celeste's family finances. It also says Helen was afraid Celeste had a reason to marry you that you didn't understand. Mason stared at the screen. Then another line came through. You need to read this before you speak to Celeste again. Mason read the message twice before he opened the file. He was still standing in the bank conference room, one hand on the back of the chair, with Mara beside him, and the care account statements spread across the table. Outside the glass wall, bank employees moved through their ordinary workday with folders and coffee cups, unaware that one family's trust was being pulled apart one document at a time. The email loaded slowly. It was a draft from Helen's old account, never sent, no subject line, just his name at the top. Mason, I do not know if I should send this. I do not want to hurt you. I do not want to sound suspicious or unkind, but something is wrong with Celeste's family, and I think you need to know before you marry her. Mason stopped reading for a moment. His mother had written this before everything got worse, before the uniform, before the storage room, before the care account became a source of money for someone else's life. He could tell from the date, almost 3 years ago, only 4 months after he left Portland. He sat down. Mara watched him without speaking. Mason kept reading. Helen wrote that Celeste had been taking calls late at night in the garden. She had overheard names, not gossip names, legal names. Creditors, a private lender, a family trust that had been drained, a mansion in Lake Oswego quietly listed through a shell broker. Helen wrote that she did not understand all of it, but she understood fear when she heard it. Celeste was afraid of losing something, not Mason, something older, a name, a status, a life built on appearances. The next paragraph was harder to read. I asked her once if everything was all right. She smiled at me in that careful way of hers and said people like me could never understand what it meant to carry a family name. I told her I understood more than she thought. I understand losing things. I understand starting over. She did not like that. Mason could almost hear Helen's voice in those words. Gentle but not weak, careful but not blind. He kept going. She wants the wedding soon. Too soon maybe. I know you love her, or maybe you love the life she seems to fit into. But I worry she wants the protection of your name and money more than she wants the weight of your heart. Please do not be angry with me. I am not trying to stand between you and happiness. I am trying to ask you to slow down long enough to see clearly. Mason leaned back. The room felt smaller. He remembered that time, the calls from Singapore, Celeste asking if they could set a date before his return, Celeste saying long engagements made people doubt commitment, Celeste laughing when he mentioned a prenup, saying it sounded cold, like a contract between strangers, and Helen in those brief calls, asking quiet questions. Are you sure there's no rush? Are you resting enough to think? Have you spoken to your lawyer about everything? He had brushed it off. Not angrily, almost worse, lightly. He had told himself his mother was old-fashioned, that she did not understand people like Celeste, that she still saw the world through the lens of rent notices and grocery coupons, while he now lived among board seats and private investments. He had mistaken experience for fear. He had mistaken warning for jealousy. Mara turned the tablet slightly toward herself. May I? Mason nodded. She read in silence, her expression changing only once when she reached the part about the family trust. Then she scrolled to the metadata. This draft was never sent, she said. I know. Was your mother using this email after you left? She used to. Then Celeste told me she preferred calls, said email stressed her out. Mara's eyes lifted. Mason understood before she said anything. Deleted messages, he said. Possibly, or access control. We need your tech team to preserve logs if they still exist. Login IPs, device access, password changes. Mason's phone rang before he could answer. Celeste. Her name lit up on the screen like nothing had happened, like he had not found his mother in a storage room, like he was still a man she could calm with the right tone. Mara shook her head once. Mason declined the call. A second later, a text came. We need to talk before this gets uglier. You are being manipulated by guilt. Your mother has always known how to make you feel responsible. Mason stared at the words. His first instinct was rage. A clean, bright rage that wanted to answer immediately. But then he looked at Mara, and Mara looked back at him with the patience of someone who had kept many powerful people from ruining their own cases. He put the phone down. Good, Mara said quietly. By afternoon, Mason returned to the hotel. Helen was sitting near the window with a cup of tea in both hands. Angela, the nurse, had left a meal on the table and a note saying Helen had eaten most of it. That small detail settled something in Mason's chest. Not peace. Not yet. But proof that care could be simple when nobody used it as control. Helen looked up when he entered. You found something, she said. He did not answer right away. She knew him too well, even after all the distance, even after 3 years of filtered calls and stolen letters, she could still read his face before he spoke. Mason sat across from her. I read the email you wrote. Helen closed her eyes. I never meant to send it, she whispered. Why not? Because I was afraid you would think I was trying to ruin your happiness. He looked at her hands around the cup. Those hands had raised him, supported him, signed papers she did not understand because someone used his name as a weapon. And still she was worried about hurting him. I should have listened, he said. Helen opened her eyes. You loved her, I trusted her, that too. Mason looked toward the city. For a long time neither of them spoke. Then Helen set her cup down. Celeste was not always cruel at first, she said. Cold, maybe. Proud. But not like this. Mason turned back. Helen continued slowly, choosing each word as if it cost her something. She cared very much about how people saw her, the right flowers, the right seating at dinner, the right names on invitation lists. I thought it was just her world, different from mine. She said you couldn't understand what it meant to carry a family name. Helen gave a small, tired smile. People say things like that when they think money makes them deep. Mason almost smiled. Almost. She was scared, Helen said. That was what I noticed first. Not sad, not guilty, scared. Every time someone mentioned her father's estate or old Monroe money, her whole face would tighten. Mason had met Celeste's father only twice before the man moved to Arizona and stopped attending public events. Celeste always said he was private. Her mother, Vivian Monroe, still appeared at charity luncheons, still wore pearls, still spoke like the world owed her a quiet room. But now Mason wondered how much of that life had been stage dressing. Helen leaned back slightly. One afternoon, Celeste's mother came to the house. They argued in the study. I did not listen on purpose, but they were loud. Vivian told Celeste that marrying you would restore everything. Celeste told her she was handling it. Mason felt the words settle like stones. She was handling it, he repeated. Helen nodded. Why didn't you tell me that? I tried. Her voice thinned. Not that part, not directly. But I asked you to slow down. I asked you to protect yourself. You sounded so tired on the phone, Mason, so far away, and Celeste was always near the call. Always. That detail made Mason look up. She listened. Sometimes she sat right there. Sometimes she said she wanted to say hello first. Sometimes she held the phone and put it on speaker. Helen swallowed. After a while I stopped knowing what I could say. The room went quiet again. This was the part that made the betrayal feel almost ordinary. Not dramatic, not loud, just a slow tightening around one woman's voice until she could no longer speak freely to her own son. Mason's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Celeste's number. Dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. Mother will be there and so will the Keating investors. We are not canceling because of your emotional episode. We will present a united front, and then we will discuss your mother privately like adults." Mason stared at the message. Then another came through. "And Mason, bring the prenup file if you still insist on humiliating me with one." Mara called a second later, as if she had felt the shift from across the city. "Mason," she said, "I just reviewed the latest draft of the prenup your office forwarded last month." He stood slowly. "What about it?" It was altered. His fingers tightened around the phone. "How?" "Spousal support triggers, property language, access to the Portland house. A clause that could give Celeste substantial claim if the marriage ended after a relatively short period, especially if she could show she managed family caregiving responsibilities." Mason looked at Helen. Helen looked back, confused by the change in his face. Mara's voice lowered. "She wasn't just hiding what she did to your mother. She may have been preparing to profit from it." Mason did not go to the mansion alone. By 6:30 that evening, a black car pulled up outside the hotel. Mara sat beside him in the back seat with a slim leather folder on her lap. Tessa sat in the second car behind them, not because Mason wanted to expose her, but because Mara had asked her to be close if a statement became necessary. Helen sat beside Mason, dressed in a soft navy blouse Angela had helped her choose. Her hair was brushed back neatly. Her hands were folded around the same old mug wrapped carefully in a cloth inside her tote bag. Mason had asked her twice if she wanted to stay at the hotel. Both times Helen had said no. "I spent too long being hidden," she said quietly. "I can be seen tonight." He had not argued with that. The mansion looked brighter than it had the night before. Every window glowed. Valet attendants moved cars along the circular driveway. Through the tall front windows, Mason could see people standing with wine glasses in their hands, dressed in dark suits and silk dresses laughing beneath the chandelier. Celeste had gone ahead with the dinner. Of course she had. For Celeste, appearances were not decoration, they were structure. They held her world together the way beams held up a roof. If she could make enough people believe things were fine, maybe things would become fine. Maybe Mason would look cruel for disrupting a beautiful evening. Maybe Helen would look fragile. Maybe the truth would look impolite. The front door opened before Mason reached it. A staff member stepped back quickly, eyes wide. The noise from inside drifted into the entry hall. Low music, polite laughter, crystal against crystal, the kind of sound money made when no one wanted to mention what it cost. Celeste stood near the dining room archway with a glass of champagne in her hand. Her cream dress from the night before was gone. Tonight she wore black satin, elegant and severe. Her hair was smooth. Her diamonds were small enough to seem tasteful and expensive enough to be noticed. Her mother, Vivian Monroe, stood beside her in pearls, thin and pale with the controlled posture of a woman who had spent decades refusing to let shame touch her face. Celeste saw Mason first, then she saw Helen. The champagne glass lowered half an inch, only half. "Mason," Celeste said, voice warm enough for the room to hear, "there you are." We were beginning to worry. The people nearby turned. Mason recognized several investors from Portland, a hospital board member, a retired judge Celeste liked to invite because his presence made every room seem legitimate, and 3 women from Vivian's charity circle. All adults, all polished, all watching now. Celeste moved toward him as if nothing had happened. "Helen," she said gently, the way someone might speak to a person who needed handling. "You should have stayed at the hotel and rested." Helen's fingers tightened slightly around her tote bag. Mason felt it. He stepped forward. "Don't speak to her like that." The room changed. Not loudly, it tightened. Conversation stopped in small pockets. A waiter froze near the wall with a tray of glasses. Vivian's eyes sharpened. Celeste smiled, but her jaw held tension. "This is not the place." "No," Mason said. "It should have been handled before I ever got home." Vivian gave a quiet laugh. "Mason, dear, surely whatever family disagreement happened last night can wait until after dinner. There are guests here." "That's why Celeste chose tonight," Mason said, "because guests make silence easier." Celeste's face cooled. "You are exhausted. You flew across the world, found your mother having a difficult evening, and now you're turning confusion into accusation." Mason looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the room. "My mother was not having a difficult evening. She was carrying dirty plates in a Maid uniform through the service hallway. She has been sleeping in a storage room beside laundry supplies." A soft sound moved through the room. Not shock exactly, discomfort. People hated being forced to see what they had been close enough to ignore. Celeste set her glass down. That is a gross misrepresentation. Mara stepped beside Mason. She did not introduce herself loudly. She did not need to. The folder in her hand and the calm in her face did enough. Mason opened the leather folder and placed a photo on the side table near the foyer. It showed the storage room, the cot, the shelf of detergent, the plastic crate, then another photo, the grey uniform, then another, the staff task list with Helen's name penciled beside service duties. Vivian's expression flickered. Celeste did not yet. You took photos of a private room in my home? She asked. My home, Mason said, bought for my mother. Celeste's eyes flashed. A home I managed while you were busy becoming the great Mason Reed. Helen flinched again. This time several people saw it. Mason let the silence sit for a second. Then he said, You managed it by moving my mother downstairs, cutting off her calls, keeping her letters, and paying fake renovation invoices from her care account. Celeste's face went still. That was the first real crack. A man near the dining room cleared his throat and looked at his wife. Vivian's hand tightened around her clutch. Celeste took one careful breath. Helen signed the access forms. Everything was authorized. She signed after you told her I had approved it. Celeste gave a small, pitying smile. Helen may remember it that way. Mason reached into the folder and pulled out the bank document. The mobile notary record says the authorization was signed at this house, honored when I was in Singapore. My call logs show I never spoke to my mother that week. Your text to me that day said she was sleeping and could not come to the phone. The room was silent now. Really silent. Celeste looked at Mara. I don't know what he thinks he's proving, Mara spoke for the first time. At this stage, we are preserving evidence and notifying relevant parties that records connected to Helen Reed's care account, communications access, household staffing, and renovation invoices should not be destroyed. Vivian stepped forward. This is absurd. Celeste gave up 3 years of her life managing this household. Mason turned to her. Did she also tell you my mother was wearing a uniform at your charity lunches? Vivian's face tightened. No answer. That answer was loud enough. Helen had not spoken yet. She stood beside Mason, shoulders straight but pale. He looked at her, giving her the choice. Not forcing, not pushing, just seeing her. Helen breathed in. Then she said, quietly but clearly, I was told it would be easier if guests thought I was staff. The room seemed to stop breathing. Celeste's eyes snapped toward her. Helen. But Helen did not look down this time. I was told not to make things awkward, she continued. I was told Mason was busy. I was told I would upset him if I complained. Mason felt his throat tighten. Helen looked at the people in the room, not with anger, but with the exhausted dignity of someone who had finally carried shame to the edge of herself and set it down. I believed some of it, she said. That is the part I have to live with. No one moved. Celeste's control began to slip. This is pathetic, she said, no longer performing warmth. You all have no idea what it was like dealing with her. The constant sighing, the guilt, the way she watched everything I did like I was some gold digger off the street. Mason's eyes hardened. You were taking money from her care account. I was maintaining the household you abandoned, Celeste snapped. You sent money and disappeared. Don't stand here pretending to be noble because your guilt finally came home before the wedding. The words struck. Not because they were fair, because part of them was true. Mason did not hide from it. He let it hit him. Then he answered quietly, You're right that I was absent. You're not right that my absence gave you permission to humiliate my mother. Celeste opened her mouth. Mara placed a small recorder on the table. This audio was voluntarily provided by a household employee, she said. We are not playing it as legal evidence tonight. We are playing it because Ms. Monroe has repeatedly challenged the facts in front of witnesses. Celeste's face changed. Mara, Mason said softly. Mara pressed play. Celeste's voice filled the foyer, crisp and unmistakable. She is not family tonight. She is staff. If Mason wants to keep paying for that old woman to stand around breathing guilt into every room, then the least she can do is be useful. A woman near the fireplace gasped. Helen closed her eyes. Mason kept his on Celeste. The recording continued, and if she tries to call him again, take the phone. He pays too much for her to make him miserable from across the world. Mara stopped it there. For a moment no one spoke. Then Vivian whispered Celeste. It was not defense this time. It was warning. Celeste looked around the room and saw it happening. The investors no longer met her eyes. The charity women had gone pale. The retired judge stared at the floor with a hard expression. The perfect room had turned against her without anyone needing to shout. That was when Celeste's face changed completely. The smoothness disappeared, the elegance cracked. What remained was fear, anger, and something desperate underneath both. "You want to talk about secrets," she said, voice shaking now. "Fine. Ask your saint of a mother what she was hiding before you ever left America." Mason went still. Helen's eyes opened. Celeste pointed at her, breathing hard. "Ask her what she sold. Ask her why she never told you where the money really came from when your life almost fell apart. Go on, Mason. Ask her why the woman you're defending has been lying to you longer than I ever did." For the first time that night, Mason looked at his mother and did not know what to ask. The room was still full of guests, but none of them felt close anymore. They stood beneath the chandelier with their untouched drinks and careful faces, pretending not to lean toward the next piece of damage. Celeste had thrown the words into the air like a match. Now she stood there breathing hard, almost satisfied, as if she had finally found a weapon sharp enough to cut through Mason's certainty. Helen's face had gone pale, not guilty in the way Celeste wanted her to look. Afraid of Mason's hurt, afraid of his questions. Afraid of a truth she had buried so deeply that even this public humiliation could not keep it quiet anymore. Mason stepped closer to her. "Mom." Helen closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, the old steadiness was there, faint but real. The same steadiness that had carried her through years of hard work, hospital hallways, overdue bills, and quiet sacrifices no one had ever clapped for. Celeste laughed softly. "Go ahead, Helen, tell him, since tonight is all about truth." Mason turned on her. "Be quiet." The words were not loud, they did not need to be. Celeste went still. Helen touched Mason's sleeve. "No, it's all right. It's not all right," he said. "I know." Her voice trembled, "but she is not wrong about this part. I did hide something from you." Mason felt the words move through him. Slowly, he had already taken in so much that night. The cot, the uniform, the blocked calls, the stolen letters, the care account, the altered prenup. He did not know how there could still be more room for pain, but families had rooms inside them too. Rooms no one opened until something forced the door. Helen looked toward the guests, then back to her son. "Not here." Celeste stepped forward. "Why not? You didn't mind letting everyone hear what I said." Mara moved slightly, placing herself between Celeste and Helen without making it dramatic. "Ms. Monroe, I would advise you to stop speaking." Vivian reached for her daughter's arm. Celeste pulled away. "No," Celeste said. "If I'm being tried in this room, then so is she. Everyone wants to pretend Helen Reed is some saint. She is not. She lied to him. For years." Mason looked at Mara. Mara gave him a small nod. They could leave. They should leave. Nothing good came from letting Celeste control the room one more second. But Helen surprised them all. She stepped forward, not far, just enough to stand beside her son, not behind him. "I sold my house," she said. Mason turned slowly. "What house?" Helen swallowed. "The old one, the one on Hawthorne. The house I kept after your father died." The words landed with quiet force. Mason remembered the house, not as a scene with younger versions of themselves moving through it, but as paperwork, addresses, family references, the place his mother used to mention when she talked about stability. It had been small, worn, and worth more emotionally than financially, or so he had thought. "You told me you rented it out," Mason said. "I did for a while." His voice lowered. "Then what happened?" Helen looked at him, and this time she did not look away. "After your accident." The room seemed to tighten around him. Mason had not thought about that period in years. Not fully. He had pushed it into the part of his life before success, before headlines, before the company became something other people valued. He remembered the hospital bills, the physical therapy, the months when his body healed slower than his ambition. He remembered being angry at weakness, angry at debt, angry that the future he had almost reached could be taken away by one bad night on a wet road. He also remembered the bills somehow getting paid. He had always believed insurance covered more than it did, that a settlement had come through, that the hospital reduced charges, that Helen had worked out a payment plan. He had never asked enough. "Helen," he said, and the use of her name instead of Mom made her eyes wet. "What did you do?" "I sold it," she said, quietly, quickly, "for less than it was worth because I needed the money fast." Mason stared at her. No, yes. No, you didn't. Helen gave a small, broken smile. You sound like I did when I signed the closing papers. The words tore through him. Celeste watched, no longer smiling. Even she seemed to understand that this truth had not landed the way she hoped. It had not made Helen smaller. It had made the room see her more clearly. Mason's voice came out rough. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were already carrying too much. Helen's hands clasped in front of her. You were angry at your body. Angry at money. Angry that you might lose the company before it truly started. You kept saying you would pay me back, even when you thought the bills were smaller than they were. And I knew if you found out I sold the house, you would stop building your life just to spend years trying to give mine back. He looked away, but there was nowhere safe to look. Every polished surface in that house reflected some version of what he had missed. Helen continued, that house mattered to me. It did, but you mattered more. Mason pressed his hand to his mouth. For a moment he was no billionaire, no founder, no man with lawyers and cars waiting outside. He was only a son standing in a room full of strangers, realizing his mother had lost the last solid thing she owned so he could keep moving forward, and Celeste knew, he said. Helen nodded slowly. She found the closing documents in an old file box after she moved my things downstairs. Mason turned towards Celeste. Celeste lifted her chin, but some of the confidence had drained out of her. I found out your mother had been lying to you. That is all. No, Helen said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Helen's voice strengthened, not much but enough. You found out I was afraid he would blame himself. You used it. Celeste's mouth tightened. Helen went on. You told me if I made trouble, you would tell him I had hidden the truth all these years. You said he would never forgive me for making him build a life on a sacrifice he didn't consent to. Mason's eyes filled, but his voice was steady when he spoke. You thought I wouldn't forgive her. Celeste said nothing. You thought that was the thing that would break us? Still nothing. Mason stepped closer, not in anger now, but with a cold clarity that made Celeste take half a step back. My mother sold a house to save my future. You used that sacrifice to keep her in a storage room. Vivian whispered Celeste's name again, but this time it sounded less like warning and more like disbelief. Mason turned away from them all and faced Helen. The room blurred around the edges. He wanted to apologize, but the words felt too small. Sorry did not buy back years. Sorry did not rebuild a house. Sorry did not undo the nights she had slept under a roof that belonged to him while believing she had to earn her place in it. He took her hands. I should have asked, he said. I should have known. Helen shook her head. No, I chose to keep it from you, to protect me, yes. And who protected you? That question broke her. Not loudly. Helen did not collapse. She only lowered her head as tears slipped down her face, quiet and devastating. Mason pulled her into his arms right there in the foyer. She held on to him with both hands, not like someone ashamed anymore, but like someone who had been waiting years to be allowed to stop standing alone. No one in the room spoke. Even Celeste stayed silent. Mara let the moment breathe. Then she stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. This gathering is over. Notices will be sent tonight regarding preservation of records, financial activity, household employment documents, and all communications related to Helen Reed. Ms. Monroe, you should retain counsel. Celeste looked at Mason. You're really going to do this? Mason kept one arm around his mother. Yes, you'll destroy me. No, he said, you made choices. Now they get named. Celeste's face twisted. After everything I gave up for you? Mason looked at the room, the chandelier, the dinner waiting cold in the next room, the people who had come to watch a perfect engagement and instead witnessed a family secret bleed into the open. You didn't give up anything, he said. You took. Then he turned to Mara. Start the Elder financial exploitation case, full review, civil claim, any mandatory reports that apply. Celeste went white. Mara nodded once. Tonight, Mason guided Helen toward the door. But before they reached it, Tessa appeared near the side hallway. She was pale, shaking slightly, holding her phone in one hand. Mason, she said. He stopped. Tessa looked past him at Celeste, then back at him. There's one more file on the flash drive, she said. I didn't know if I should tell you here. Mason felt Helen tighten beside him. What file? Tessa swallowed. It's Celeste talking to the notary after your mother signed the care account papers. She says once the wedding is done, Helen won't be a problem anymore. The file on Tessa's flash drive did not need to be played twice. Celeste's voice was clear enough the first time. Calm, careless, too sure of herself. She had been speaking to the mobile notary after Helen signed the account papers, laughing softly as if the whole thing were an inconvenience she had already solved. Once the wedding is done, Helen won't be a problem anymore. That sentence changed everything, not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic, because it was plain. It showed intent. It showed that Helen had not been an accident in Celeste's life. She had been an obstacle, something to be managed, reduced, hidden, and eventually removed from influence. Mara moved quickly after that. By the next morning, formal notices went out. Bank records were preserved. Household staff were contacted through council. The notary received a letter. The contractor who had created the false renovation paperwork was identified. Celeste was removed from every account connected to Helen, the Portland house, and Mason's household operations. The engagement ended with one signed letter, short and final. There was no public scene after that night, no shouting on the sidewalk, no dramatic revenge. Mason did not need to ruin Celeste in front of cameras or gossip pages. He had learned something from watching his mother stand in that foyer. The truth did not become stronger because it was cruel. It became stronger because it was complete. Celeste hired attorneys within days. Vivian Monroe stopped answering calls from the charity circle. The investors who had attended the dinner quietly withdrew from every social event tied to Celeste's name. The civil claim moved forward. So did the Elder Financial Exploitation Review. Whether every charge would become a criminal matter was not Mason's decision, and for once, he did not try to control what did not belong to him. He let the record speak. Helen's recovery was quieter. At first, she still apologized for everything, for asking for tea, for needing rest, for taking too long in the bathroom, for not remembering where she had placed her glasses. Every apology landed in Mason like a small stone. He did not correct her sharply. He learned not to make healing feel like another rule she had to follow. Instead, he answered the same way every time. "You're not a burden." Some days she believed him. Some days she did not. The mansion sold before winter. Helen was the one who asked for it. Mason thought she might want it reclaimed, cleaned, and restored. He thought maybe replacing the furniture and repainting the walls would erase what had happened there. But Helen stood in the service hallway one last time, looking at the door to the storage room, and shook her head. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life proving I belong in a place that taught me to disappear," she said. So Mason sold it. Before the closing, he returned to that room with Helen. The shelves had been emptied, the detergent bottles were gone, the cot had been removed. Sunlight from the hallway reached only a few feet inside, still not enough to make the room feel warm. Helen stood there in silence. Then Mason stepped in, picked up the last thing left on the floor, and held it in his hand. A small gray button from the Maid uniform. Helen looked at it. Mason closed his fist around it and said, "Never again." The new house was smaller. That surprised everyone except Helen. It sat near the water, not on a cliff or behind iron gates, but on a quiet street where the air smelled faintly of rain and pine. It had wide windows, a small garden, a warm kitchen, and no service hallway, no back entrance for certain people, no room designed to make anyone invisible. The deed and estate papers were written properly this time. Helen had her own attorney. Mason insisted on that, not because he did not trust himself, but because he wanted her to know that love and independence could stand in the same room. When Helen signed the papers, her hand shook. Mason watched but did not help unless she asked. That mattered. Afterward, he placed the chipped World's Best Mom mug on the kitchen shelf. Not in a box, not in a private drawer, on the shelf where anyone could see it. Helen laughed softly when she noticed. "It doesn't match anything," she said. "It matches us," Mason answered. For a long moment, she only looked at him. Then she reached for his hand. Tessa testified through proper legal channels. Mason's attorneys made sure she was protected from retaliation, and later, when she was ready, she accepted a position managing client services at one of Mason's community health projects. She did not receive it as charity. She earned it by telling the truth when silence would have been safer. Mason also created the Helen Reed Dignity Fund, a local program that helped older adults who were isolated, financially controlled, or made to feel unwanted in homes they had once helped build. Helen did not want her name on anything at first. She said it felt too big. Then the first letter came from a man in his 70s who had used the fund to get legal advice after a relative drained his savings account. Helen read the letter twice. After that, she never asked Mason to rename it. Spring came slowly. One evening, Mason found his mother in the kitchen making cinnamon tea. For a second, he simply stood in the doorway and listened to the spoon touch the cup. It was such a small sound, ordinary, almost nothing, but it felt like home. Helen turned and saw him. "You're hovering," she said. He smiled. "I'm learning." She poured him a cup and set it on the table. They sat near the window while rain tapped gently against the glass. No staff moved around them. No one waited for permission to speak. No one ate alone in another room. The pain had not disappeared. It never worked that way. 3 years could not be undone by a new house, a lawsuit, or one apology. But something had shifted. Helen no longer lowered her eyes when someone entered the room. Mason no longer confused payment with presence. He visited without needing a crisis. He called without watching the clock. And when guilt rose in him, as it still did, Helen would sometimes touch his hand and remind him that healing was not the same as pretending nothing happened. On the shelf behind them, the old mug sat in the warm kitchen light. World's best mom. Not hidden anymore. Not beside cot. Not in a room that smelled like bleach. Mason finally understood that the best house he could give his mother was not the largest one. It was the one where she never had to enter through the back, never had to earn her place, and never had to stay quiet to be loved. If this story made you think of someone who once carried more than they ever told you, maybe this is the moment to reach out. And if it touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments, because some stories stay with us for a reason.